Kursk is a game based on an incident which involved an Oscar II class Russian nuclear submarine with the same name. The developers called the game the first ever adventure and documentary video game inspired by real events. And while I do remember hearing about the Kursk disaster back in the day, I did not remember much of it, so I went ahead and read about it. It's a terrible tragedy that cost 118 people their lives. This all sounded too interesting to ignore, so I had to play the game. As you begin, you are presented with a fictional character who will act as our protagonist. We're a spy who has to acquire information about a new type of torpedoes. The game first starts off with us being caught by a crew member and being locked up in a cabin. Shortly after that, the actual disaster begins, and we have to attempt to save ourselves. And just as you're about to do that, the game suddenly shifts to an earlier state of the story. In a way, the player is being shown what is going to happen, but then given the chance to experience the events that led up to that point. I'm not a big fan of this approach, because when it comes to the Kursk disaster, the most interesting part is the actual disaster. Still, the game introduces our protagonists to their mission. That same mission, as well as most everything else that happens throughout the game, is all fabricated and not following the actual events of the disaster. But I was fine with it because we do need some sort of underlying story to drive us. Think of the movie Titanic, for example. You always need something else that connects the viewer to the story, something before the tragedy, so that they can experience it in a more passionate and personal way. That's why you bait the viewer in with a separate mini story and then get them to sympathize with the protagonist. The idea here is the same. The only issue is that the game showed me how the accident starts within the first few minutes, and now I'm suddenly playing something much less exciting. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind such cuts to a different timeline as long as those are not too far away. On the other hand, there are very few things I dislike as much as being shown part of the ending of a story and then being pushed all the way back to its beginning. And unfortunately, this is exactly what happens here. Due to the presentation, I assume that most of the game will take place once the Kursk disaster has already begun. I was imagining having to try to survive and do various things in the process. If you've read about what actually happened, you will see that several people have actively sacrificed their lives trying to save the rest of the crew. So to be honest, I personally expected something akin to the more recent Battlefield campaigns, which start you off as a random soldier who then gets to die. The game then shows you as another soldier. This is a good approach and would have worked very well with this setting if you ask me. It would have been interesting to see the horrors of the disaster from different angles like that. Sadly, this is not what happens here. Instead, we have this boring protagonist who speaks American English but obviously also speaks and understands Russian to such a degree that nobody suspects them of being a spy. On the other hand, every other character in the game speaks Russian only. I found this to be a strange solution. Why not make everyone speak Russian, including the protagonist? Or make everyone speak English with a Russian accent, like most games do. Don't get me wrong, I know that this is a minor thing to complain about, but it kept distracting me throughout the game as our guy would comment and talk in English, and everyone else would speak Russian. It's just weird, and as I've said, you never hear our protagonist say a single actual word in Russian, but he does seem to be communicating with the guys because you get the text as if he's telling them something. One of the first things you will notice from a technical perspective is that the game offers ultra-wide resolutions by default, which is great. Both 32:9 and 21:9 work very well here. The issue is, however, that the game itself runs very poorly. There's little to no optimization here, and although you are in a small and cramped environment almost throughout the whole game, with very few assets in any of these environments, it still runs quite poorly even on good hardware. Every door hides a mini loading screen, and your patience will be put to the test here. The animations are intentionally very long as you open them so that the game has time to load whatever's on the other side. This is especially egregious due to the nature of the gameplay. The whole game revolves around running from place to place. What's even worse is that the animations feel janky and stiff to an extreme degree. At times it seems almost like they skip frames, and while the game was not stuttering, it would still appear like it is stuttering for no reason besides the fact that it probably skips a few frames of animations. If you move especially fast, the game will stutter for a fraction of a second in order to be able to render what is around the corner, because you are generally not expected to move too fast. This happens rarely, but it is noticeable. But since I am already talking about how this game feels, let's talk about the actual gameplay. Our character enters the Kursk and we are quickly introduced to the spy tool which he carries. It can hack computers, it can pick locks and take pictures. These are also the 3 main actions you will be performing while keeping an eye on the single roaming NPC in the room that could catch you. Basically, whenever there's something to unlock, you have a single NPC walking back and forth throughout the room for no reason. They could have at least tried to give it some reason to do this, since I'm pretty certain that there are no roaming guards on a submarine like this. What annoyed the hell out of me during these moments was the slow speed at which our spy works. He takes his sweet time placing the lockpick into the locks as well as removing it once it's done. He does the same with all other actions. You'd think he would try to be a bit faster considering the fact that what he's doing is highly illegal, but no, super slow animations. What I also found strange was that once you had completed an action, for example unlocking a door, you can then enter and exit at will without issues, even if the guard can clearly see that the captain's cabin has been entered in and exited by some guy who is not the captain and is actually one of the new people on the submarine. They would be able to tell that you're not one of them. They live in this place, they see each other almost all the time. 118 people aren't a lot of people when cramped in such a small place, trust me. You get to remember these faces. You would recognize that you are definitely not the captain of the vessel. When you are not entering locked places, taking pictures of things or hacking computers, you are doing fetch quests. There are a bunch of side quests on the submarine. People ask you for all kinds of nonsense and it always involves going somewhere else and either picking something up or talking to somebody. That's pretty much it, and there are quite a few of these quests to do. They suck not only because of how boring they are, but also because of the bugs that accompany them. Some quest items are straight out behind walls and you have to essentially hug the wall and press a button to interact with them. You will not see them, but you see the indicator that there's something in that direction. So as you go closer, you actually get to interact with it. And I checked, it's not in a cabin next to yours and you're somehow clipping through. No, it's just there's nothing besides this. Another funny thing is that there are secret documents all over the place, but you're not allowed to touch them while people are looking at you. I guess that makes sense to some extent, but the problem here is that they're literally lying in the open, so why would they do that? Anyway, when a side quest wants me to find 3 documents, and some of them are actually within the field of view of NPCs, I am unsure if picking them up wouldn't be a problem, and you have to also consider that some NPCs will never move, they just stay in one place, they do not move. So now I'm thinking, is this a bug? As soon as I pick up this document, is he gonna say that he caught me and the game is over? Ironically, however, these special documents that you need for the quest, although they are not secret documents, they look exactly like the secret ones. So there's no way for you to actually know is this actually a secret document or not. So you pick it up and you hope for the best. And luckily the game does not punish you for that, obviously. But it's bad game design because you end up being confused as a player. You don't know if you can safely pick this up. The game has been teaching you that if people look at you while you pick up documents, you're gonna get in trouble. And there's no way for you to know is this a secret document or not until you pick it up. So you're just gonna be nervously looking at it and picking it up and hoping for the best. And yes, I know what some of you will say. Well, you just go, pick it up, nothing happens, you know it's cool. And yes, that's exactly how it was, but I just find that there should be another solution to this. It shouldn't be so unclear. And I first assumed that doing side quests would somehow help me get a good ending later or make the last section of the game different, the survival section. I was wrong. You see, the side quests do nothing but waste your time. That's literally it. If you only do the main quest, you're looking at 2 to 3 hours of gameplay, and that is if you choose to see both endings. What determines which ending you get, you ask? The short answer is you get to make a choice at the end of the story. And don't worry, this doesn't really spoil anything for you. I'm not going to tell you what the choices are. I'm not going to tell you any more about the gameplay, but that's how you get one of 2 endings. And really, the thing that will mostly waste your time is the fact that the submarine is very confusing. It all looks the same. It's difficult to navigate. The door's instructions are all in Russian, so if you cannot read or understand Russian, you are screwed anyway. You do get some descriptions, but you never get a map, so that's something you have to live with. There is no map, and as I've said, it just looks the same, so it's very difficult to navigate. And I believe this was a design choice with the intention of prolonging the gameplay. They knew the game was super short. They knew the game was super boring too with these side quests, and they knew that if they let you orientate easily, the game would last even less than that. You'd probably kill the game in an hour and a half if you knew where you're going. I spent so much time getting lost. I was like, was I here? Do I need to go left? Do I need to go upstairs? It's just, it all looks the same, and that's the biggest problem. One way or the other, you will finally reach the part of the game in which the actual disaster takes place. This is when the game will decide to spice the gameplay up a bit by introducing QuickTime events. However, unlike other games, here you are never explained what to do when you see a button prompt. Earlier in a side activity that I was doing, yes, there are some of those as well, where my character was at a gym and I got to exercise. I had to hold a button and release it at the right time. The issue with this is that it just shows you a button prompt with no indication if you have to press the button repeatedly, press it once, hold it. There's none of that. You just see a letter on your screen that indicates the button on the keyboard. Figure it out yourself. You get to literally guess. And even when you do guess, some of these QuickTime events do not work properly and will not always register as if you have never pressed the button. This might be the worst example of a QuickTime event I have seen, and I'm not exaggerating with the statement. And although the submarine appears to have quite a few NPCs all over the place, once the end game starts, everyone just disappears, they vanish. There are no dead bodies with the exception of a guy who helped me escape my cabin at first, but the game has to kill him off camera so that you don't get to see his janky animations, and another guy who also helps me and then gets killed instantly as well. These two are the only dead bodies you will see, and it is ridiculous. After all, 118 people died in there, but you don't get to see any of them die. It's so strange, because as the place gets flooded and you swim through it, you actually recognize some of these places, and some of them are places where there were a lot of people earlier, like an area for relaxation with games and entertainment, the gym. All of these people would have died. This was one of the most crowded places in the submarine, but it all just is empty now. These guys just evaporated. I do have a suspicion why though. It might be because the game is optimized so poorly that it will probably tank the frame rate into the single digits if they added dead bodies that float in water or something like that. That's just my suspicion. I don't know if that is correct. Maybe they were just lazy to do it. For whatever reason, it again breaks the immersion completely because there are no dead bodies. Nobody is dead in there. The game also soft locked on me once. I entered a script event, however the script was not executed properly, and my character remained stationary in an animation, and no matter what I did, he would not fix himself. So I ended up having to restart the game and lost some of my progress. It wasn't much, but a little bit was lost anyway because of this. My biggest disappointment was that the game has about 10 to 15 minutes left once the disaster actually starts. Since everything else has been an utter disappointment, I was expecting things to get better then, but sadly that was not in the cards. You'd think that the game dedicated to the Kursk disaster would let you see more of the actual disaster, but sadly that's not the case. What you do get is to do shitty fetch quests, and they don't even work that well. The game sells for €17 on Steam and it is heavily overpriced. It's also boring as hell. I've recently had the displeasure of playing Generation Zero, and that was also an extremely boring game, but at least it worked better in terms of gameplay. Kursk doesn't manage to get as boring as that game, but only because it's a much shorter experience. And while that helps it a little bit, it more than makes up for that short gameplay with its terrible performance and presentation. Wow, I don't know if that sentence makes sense to you, but somehow that's how I feel about it. If you're anything like me, you thought that this documentary game, and I'm making sarcastic quotation marks with my hands as I'm calling it that way, would be something unique, something interesting that will simultaneously educate you a bit about what happened and provide some entertainment value with its gameplay. One can tell the developers were ambitious and tried to do something. They really tried their best, but sadly it didn't work out at all. I've checked the Steam forums and noticed that some major bugs have been fixed with a recent patch. Some of these bugs affected the main quest, making the game impossible to finish. So they are trying to fix the many issues the game has, but make no mistake, too much is not well here in both technical aspect as well as from the perspective of gameplay and storytelling. So should you play this game, my advice personally is to avoid it. Don't waste your money on it. And if you decide not to follow my advice, at least make sure that you have a powerful enough PC to run it. I have an i7 7700 with 16 gigs of RAM and a GTX 1080, and at times I could tell that the game dropped below 45 frames. This is when my eyes really start to be bothered by it, so I know that it's happening. So unless your PC is hardcore, I advise you don't take this game. This is the part where I thank you for watching my video and remind you that I now have a Patreon page on which some of my more wealthy viewers who wish to help me pay my bills could support me. If you can afford it and would like to help, the link will be in the description of this video. No matter what you decide, thank you for watching and have a great day.